Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking with a fascinating woman about a story that probably very few people know about but are beginning to. It was back in 1976 when the newly crowned Miss Tennessee was invited to Graceland to meet the one and only King of Rock and Roll, Elvis Presley. Going along with her as well was her sister, Ginger. Little did she know that on that particular night, this 20-year-old woman would be swept off her feet by Elvis Presley, and they would begin a love affair that would spend the next 9 months, how they got to know each other, fall in love with the real Elvis Presley. They were also engaged to be married in 1977, and that would be in Christmas, but it just didn't happen. On the program today, we're going to be talking about the book that is out there now, Elvis and Ginger, Elvis Presley's Fiancee, and Last Love Finally tells her story. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program our guest, Ginger Alden. Ginger, how are you today?
Fine, thank you, Daniel.
This is a wonderful opportunity, I think, for me, because I remember at the ages of 7, 8, and 9 years old as Elvis came into my life. I actually lived in Fort Hood, Texas, and I believe he still has a mansion down there that we used to go by all the time.
Really?
And I would wonder what it would have been like to have met him, and I remember throwing his records on and singing and doing, I think, what a lot of boys in America used to do, which was wanting to become Elvis Presley, and to realize that here I am in 1 degree of separation from someone who was very, very close to him. Tell us how this all started from your point of view.
Well, I perfectly understand. I grew up in Memphis and was proud as a young child that Elvis shared my home, and my mother would play a lot of music, Engelbert Humperdinck, Dean Martin, and of course Elvis on the radio, a lot of his gospel albums, and she was quite musically talented herself. She could play mandolin guitar and the piano, and many times I would stand behind her and sing some hymn songs, and my sister Terry was very classical also. But my father was in the Army, and he was in public relations and recruiting, and he happened to be at Kennedy Veterans Hospital when Elvis was inducted into the Army in 1958, and they met at that time. And 2 years later, when Elvis was released from the Army and back at his home, Graceland, my father stopped by Graceland on occasion. He was trying to get some publicity, little tidbits for an Army newsletter. And he became friendly with the guard at the gates, and who was Elvis's uncle. And on occasion, Elvis would invite strangers and friends to the movies and the fairgrounds, and so Elvis's uncle invited my father one evening. And he brought my mom, and they got to attend a movie with Elvis, which was great. And then shortly after that, my father was also invited to the fairgrounds, and he was allowed to bring his family, which other people were bringing their family. And so I first met Elvis when I was 5 years old, and he patted me and my sister Terry on our heads at the fairgrounds. And he was so generous that night, and we got to ride the rides as many times as we wanted. And then quite a few years later, in November of 1976, my sister Terry was Miss Tennessee at the time, and we received a phone call at our home in Memphis. George Klein, a close friend of Elvis's, was saying that Elvis would like to meet the new Miss Tennessee. And my sister was dating someone, and I had been seeing someone myself, but my sister Rosemary asked my sister Terry, can Ginger and I accompany you? And she was happy about that. We just thought we would get a chance to peek inside Graceland, shake Elvis's hand, and walk home, or not walk home, but go home, and to have a great story to tell our friends. But that evening turned out to be quite different for me.
Now, it's really fascinating for people to know that this book here, first of all, my first question would be, I think a lot of people are wondering, why so long to finally tell the story?
Well, I had no intention of writing a book. I wrote my memories down shortly after Elvis passed away. It was my own personal way of just holding on. I didn't want to forget so many things he said and things that happened with us. And I went forward with my life. I worked. Eventually I got married, had my son, but in the course of this time there was a lot of hearsay about Elvis's last 9 months and our relationship, and some fabricated tales and untruths spinning around out there, as thing often happens. And it was hard, but I wanted to raise my son. I knew this would be quite an emotional journey to sit down and put all my memories together, and I waited until my son, he turned 20 this year, and he went off to college 2 years ago. So for the past 2 years, when he went off to college, I sat down and put all of this together.
I know you're so right, about, the life of Elvis Presley and especially his death, that there seemed to be a lot of myths and, like you said, untruths that were surrounding what happened. Now, I'll tell you this as a fact. Even though I was a fan of Elvis Presley growing up, as a young child, and of course it was a shock in 1977 when the news came out that Elvis Presley was dead. It was almost unreal,
Exactly.
And the thing is, though, this is the first time I had ever read about Elvis Presley was your book.
Really?
Yes, that is a total fact. So
wow.
I didn't get into the myths or any of that. As a matter of fact, by 1977, Elvis was more or less a memory for me. He was always there, and I still remember, as a kid trying to shake the booty as I'm singing "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog." But the fact is, my mother really loved it. And I remember what a big deal it was when he performed the very first world syndicated concert for everybody to actually see who he was.
Right.
And what really surprised me as I was reading the story that you wrote about all this is that he never toured outside of the United States, and I did not know that.
Yeah, I didn't really think about that. I thought he was so well loved and well known. And one evening I wrote about we were sitting by his pool, and he said he would love to play Europe. He said, "Could you imagine if I performed in England? I'd have to sing from a cage, like I'd need more protection than the president." And it hit me. I was like, wow, something that I was 20 years old at the time that I hadn't even really thought about with him. But he's so loved and just so it's amazing.
Especially if you can get that Elvis Presley on velvet. We all know about that story there, I think, by now. But, the thing is, what I really enjoyed about reading this book is at first you're kind of somebody, and again, this was the first time I had ever read anything about Elvis's life. And I remember there was the short mini-series movie about Elvis and Me, which was a relationship between him and Priscilla Presley. But the fact is that, you kind of go into this thinking, I'm going to hear a lot of this splash and this glitz and this glamour. But the fact is, your book is written with such a tremendous intimacy where you go, this is so cool. You get to know what it was like day after day after day, what a regular life and seemingly at times a regular guy Elvis Presley really was.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. Yes, it's hard being an icon, and for him, I just wanted the public to know, he was human. He had good days, he had bad days, he laughed, he cried, but overall, he just, he was such a giver in the most remarkable way, and such a kind and caring person, and took on others' problems as his own, and got a great deal of joy from doing that and being able to help others.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know one of the things that I think would be interesting for listeners out there to know is that he was really big about spirituality. I mean, obviously people would know about him singing gospels and so forth, but it was really what he was into as far as spirituality. He loved the Eastern philosophy and especially numerology, and you guys spent many nights talking about these things, and he also did a lot of reading to you and kind of brought you into the fold with things like that.
Oh, absolutely. That was the very first night I met him, and I ended up sitting on his bed. He was quite the gentleman, and I remembered he had this large book with an illustration. He pointed it out to me and said, "This is an illustration of God." And there were symbols of fire, ice, rain, and wind at his sides, and seated on a big throne. And it reminded me of a book. My mother had a huge black Bible. She used to pull out and read to us on occasion. Had these beautiful paintings inside, illustrations inside. And my mother's father had been a minister when she was quite young, and in this little church in Arkansas, and it was so intriguing to me that here I was sitting with Elvis Presley, this icon, and he's not putting any moves on me, he's not trying anything, but we're sitting in bed reading that first night, and he was so on a spiritual quest. It was absolutely amazing, and we spent many, many hours, reading together.
Now, did you ever gain any insight about what exactly was he searching for when it came to his spiritual quest?
I think it was difficult for Elvis to understand why he had become as famous as he had, and I think deep down he was searching for an understanding, a better understanding, and he wanted to reach so many people through his music. And it gave him great joy that he was able to do that. But I do think that was behind some of the searching that he was doing at that time in his life when I met him.
I remember as you were sharing a story where he had finally invited your family to go out and see him perform and had them sitting with Priscilla Presley's family. And I can imagine even as I was reading that, that seemed to me like, well, that would be a little odd. But it seemed to work out pretty well.
It was funny, actually. They never sat with, I was seated with Priscilla's
Oh,
family.
okay, my apologies. I knew it was something like that. So.
Yeah, they were sitting in a booth at the time. I don't think either family knew who was next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, he one evening he had me sit with Priscilla's mother and father, and it was a little awkward at the time, but
mm-hmm.
you know, they were polite and nice, and it was a fine night.
I know one of the challenges that you were talking about later in the book, as I was reading, I was thinking, you know, when is she going to actually be able to go out with her friends and, you know, enjoy who she is? Because Elvis seemed to really dominate your life, even though there was a 20-year age difference and there was a lot of love there. The fact was is it seemed like you were slowly getting lost into his world, and then you finally get to a point where you say, you know, wait a minute, you know, who am I?
Right. You know, and I wrote about, you know, some incidents that happened with a lot of things hitting me at the time. I had, you know, personal things going on in my life with my parents. Didn't have the best relationship at the time, unfortunately. And Elvis was very concerned about that and wanting to help in different ways. But I kept things from him for a while, you know. And but, you know, I thought over time things would happen. I slowly brought some girlfriends to the house, you know, on a couple of occasions. And in time, you know, would feel more comfortable because Elvis was always telling me, you have to understand you're the lady of the house. And, you know, I wish I'd been more assertive at the time, but I thought, well, you know, for me being in Graceland in the beginning was like being in the White House and trying to feel, you know, comfortable in that role of being the lady of the house.
You know, and fascinatingly enough, Ginger, that's the same way that I felt as you were beginning to read this. You know, you meet Elvis Presley, and it seems that you're in awe, you know, and even as the reader, you know, you feel in awe like, okay, this is a dream. Is this really for real? And then the next thing you know, he's interested in you and wanting to have a relationship with you, and you're thinking, but is this really real? And then it slowly gets cemented as he starts, you know, visiting, of course, your parents in their home. And you start feeling in small degrees like this is becoming very, very real. And I thought that was just a fascinating way that, you know, that was put or presented, that it wasn't just like we were just all comfortable. It took degrees for you to feel like, wow, this is really happening. And that must have been something, huh?
Oh, exactly. You know, absolutely. And I remember the first time Elvis surprised my family and pulled up on a motorcycle in the middle of the night at our home. And, you know, I don't think he thought about it. We were all in pajamas. And for him, you know, his nights were his days. And you know, we all stood up and we ended up sitting around in our pajamas reading with him. He wanted to go over the Bible with my mother. And I was like, you know, we're not in a huge arena. You know, this is Elvis sitting in my home like a neighbor down the street. And you know, I was so happy that on quite a few occasions that he felt comfortable in my family's home.
Mm-hmm. Now, I wanted to know, was there a myth or a big myth surrounding Elvis Presley that you really wanted people to, you know, kind of set the record straight on?
Well, I definitely, you know, all this talk of you know, heavy drugs and alcohol. You know, Elvis did not use street drugs. He did not drink. Never saw him drink except a couple of Mai Tais when we were on vacation in Hawaii, and which I wrote about. And he didn't like drinking around him. I had to be honest and write that Elvis had a strong dependency on sleep medication, and how I slowly started noticing this, and the things that I questioned, and how I wanted to help guide him toward a better path of, you know, for his own health, and as well as eating, you know, a little more properly. And he used so much salt, which would make him appear bloated, and I would get aggravated when people would say Elvis was fat, and I thought Elvis was never fat. It's just he honestly oversalted his food. I saw it numerous times. Had to mention it to him, and he would retain fluid. He couldn't bend his hands sometimes, and he would often tell me it bothered him because he had to take fluid pills to while he was on stage, and he said they often made him weak. And I could see him on stage, his face could look a little puffier, and then after a show he'd look 10 pounds lighter. And cameras add to him, you know, like his last CBS special. They ended up putting makeup on him, which I didn't think looked good. I thought he looked much more handsome without it, and it was, you know, caked on and kind of pasted looking on, and the camera added some pounds, and the CBS special when it came out, you know, some people were saying, oh my goodness, you know, he looked, and I thought, just being behind the scenes. And that wasn't the last actual tour. The footage that was filmed was taken from a couple of separate concerts. And if you look at pictures from the actual, I believe Indianapolis, Indiana was his very last concert. And Elvis looks good in those pictures. He's thinner looking, but a lot of people judged him from that last concert also.
I know it's pretty amazing, and it must have been, as you were saying earlier in the program, that, Elvis couldn't understand the fame and how he became so big. And you look and think, here's this great-looking guy, totally American-looking guy, the heavy sideburns going on there. The guy could move, and more than anything, he could put Jesus into your heart with his voice. Still amazing and haunting to listen to a voice that will never, ever, ever be replicated whatsoever, even though there are a lot of people out there that do Elvis, have whole careers as Elvis Presley impersonators. Have you went to see any of those kinds of things?
No, I haven't. It would really be strange for me. I mean,
I can imagine.
Get asked, and I can't. Whether I ever would in the future, I don't know. I mean, it would really feel strange for me.
I can imagine it would.
But I do remember walking with Elvis in his trophy room once, and he said, this seems like it's all someone else's. And that just blew me away because, he didn't understand, fully what he had accomplished. Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes, that people, when they get to that level, they kind of look around like, I can't believe this is really happening, and they begin to question why, when there's so many other people that could really, use some extra help, especially, being able to just simply survive, that it comes so easily. Right. But, remarkable talent, I suppose, just brings that. I mean, he truly was the light.
Oh, I definitely thought in many ways he was touched by God, and he brought such happiness. I mean, when you look at him today, and I'm on Facebook, and I have young 20-year-old men and women saying to me, how much he's influenced their life, and I'm thinking, wow, how happy he would be to hear that what he wanted always, in his music, that it's lifted people up. I hear stories when people are in the Army or at war, and they play his gospel songs, and it, help them through difficult times or illnesses, and that's just fantastic.
Mm-hmm. I know shopping with Elvis Presley was certainly an experience.
Yes, shopping Elvis style. He would close down a store, and we went into a local department store inside a shopping mall in Memphis. And the first time I went in, it was like, wow, it was a different way of doing things. But that was kind of one of the drawbacks to his celebrity, where he couldn't walk in a store and without being mobbed, so to speak. But I never felt like he was sad about it. It was just what he was used to doing,
mm-hmm.
And we would walk in, and he would pick out, coats or whatever he wanted for anyone.
Because I know, as he said, too, is that, I just can't do things that normal people get to do. And you can imagine, I mean, you take a look at, for instance, Michael Jordan, that guy couldn't even go out and enjoy a meal. They had to close down a separate section just so he could sit down and eat. And that couldn't be too easy. Now, one of the things I know that was in the back of your mind, and then it slowly unfolded in a way that I know made you feel happy and accepted, was, of course, by now Elvis Presley had a 8-year-old Lisa Marie.
Yes, and he loved his daughter so much. She was a sweet little girl. I wish there had been more time for me.
He named a plane after her, for crying out loud.
Exactly. But he had also earlier given her a golf cart with her name on the side, and between the two, she would have loved just being in that golf cart riding around. He was a wonderful dad. I mean, she had free reign when she was at Graceland because she lived with her mother in California, and she would be on tour on occasion for a few days, and then when she was out of school, she was able to be at Graceland a little more, especially that last summer. But she had a blast. She would take us for rides on the golf cart, and he would ask me to, or he would take my hand, and we would go in and say goodnight to her. But she had free reign, and she could stay up late because and sometimes when the bodyguards would have to go look for her, she didn't want to go home. They'd find her hiding in the meditation garden.
Well, it was just so nice, and then eventually Priscilla comes around and she says, I can see Elvis is in love again, and you felt a sense of acceptance even from her as well.
Well, she did. It was that was what was said to me actually at the wake, at Elvis's wake, and it blew me away. It made me feel a little more accepted. But I was never assertive with the role that Elvis was putting me in, and I was extremely, extremely shy back then. And quite quiet and didn't get to know a lot of people around him well. And my time was just spent mainly with Elvis. I didn't go wander around the house and go hang out with some other people, and they didn't get to know me well. But yes, I met Priscilla, once before the wake, and we had a nice little chat about Great Danes. I had bought a Great Dane and named it Odyssey after Elvis's opening theme song, and I thought when the dog was older it would have all this room to run around at Graceland.
And then also during his performances, he would let people know about who you were, and that really must have been something.
Yes, it was amazing. I never quite knew when he was going to introduce me, or his father, if his father was along, and but he loved getting a kick, especially he knew I was shy about it, and you could just be sitting there, and all of a sudden you'd see him start walking. And you're like, okay, is he going to do this or not? And so he got a kick out of doing that.
Mm-hmm. Now, the thing that I really found, I guess, really interesting too is, here he's at Graceland, but he spent most of his time in his bedroom when he was there. With this large house. But I remember catching a piece of an interview that you had done, and you seemed to have some concern about the people that were surrounding Elvis, especially toward the last part of his life, of whether or not they were positive influences, because they seemed to really have sort of a resentment, I guess is the best way I could put it, about, having to work for him and serve him. It was sort of like, we'll take the check, but bitterly we're going to say behind his back, this isn't something I really like doing. And that seemed kind of hard to be around something like that.
Well, he did spend a lot of time upstairs, but it was his sanctuary. I think when he was away from the crowds, I didn't want people to think he was just miserable up there. And I never witnessed that with him. We laughed a lot. He watched television. He loved good comedies. He had his office up there with an organ. He often played the organ upstairs. He had Lisa's room when his daughter was visiting, and periodically he would go downstairs. He'd usually stop by if we were going motorcycle riding, and always talk to his grandmother. But his grandmother and his aunt lived downstairs, and I think he just felt the most comfortable. It was kind of like being in an apartment upstairs, and he had everything at his fingertips.
And one of those things that were at his fingertips actually scared you to the point you weren't so sure if you were going to come back, and that was Elvis Presley and guns.
Yes, he had quite a few guns, but I have to admit I loved them. He showed a few to me over a couple of different nights, and I remember he had a little pearl-handled gold Derringer I was hoping he would give me because I thought it was so pretty. But he did give me a gun for protection of my car, because when I would drive, Elvis had asked me to move into Graceland, and at the time it wasn't my way, and he said, I respect you for that. So I would drive from my parents' house to Graceland, and I ended up keeping the gun in the glove compartment of my car for safety purposes.
And it was certainly one of those things that he found, this is how you take care of a toilet leak.
Well, that was an event that happened, and I had to be honest, and it was difficult to write some of the events that happened, which I blamed on Elvis's dependency on sleep medication, which I wrote about. And it would cause mood swings at times. And yes, this all happened over. He was very sensitive to certain noises. It like on stage, if he could hear every little thing. If something, a wrong note, someone played a wrong note or hit a wrong chord, he would stop and start over again. And that particular evening, we were sitting reading, and the handle, I think, was messed up on his toilet in his bathroom, and it kept making a noise. And he calmly got up, left the room, came back in with a machine gun, and blasted the toilet. And I can smile right now, but it was thinking back at the time, it was that that behavior that wasn't right, and I went home that day and stayed home, I think, for a day, and hoping that I could guide him toward going, this isn't funny. I don't think too many people around him, had often said no or challenged him a bit, in the past, and I think I challenged him at times, and he may not have liked it, but hopefully, it was saying, this isn't okay to do that.
Fascinatingly enough, just recently I had discovered that him and Muhammad Ali were very good friends. Do you know anything about that?
I don't. I've seen a picture of them together, and I thought, wow, that would have been great. I'd like to have met him.
Yeah, well, exactly, because I was just thinking to myself, here are two people out of Tennessee that became great. And I'm thinking, what was in the water, because they were so close in age?
Yeah, and that would have been wonderful.
Definitely. Now, as this book has been out there, Ginger, what have you seen or experienced as, a common reaction to this story?
I've been so fortunate, and it's what I wanted. So many of his fans have said, "Thank you. Now I understand." Or you're dispelling some of these myths of this this man sitting up and miserable and sad all the time, and that last year was made so dark. And I was like, this isn't the man that I fell in love with, that I had plans to marry. And yes, he was human. There were some flaws, some weaknesses that he had, which he didn't like to admit, and I wrote about some instances that happened. But 98% of the time, Elvis was in good spirits and looking forward to having more children. We wanted to get married. We'd set a wedding date, and he was looking, he had so much ahead of him. But, the fan reaction has been wonderful.
Now, over the years, have you been able to reach out, and have you and Lisa still stayed in connection, or how's that relationship?
No, I have not seen Lisa. When Elvis passed away, Lisa went back to California with her mom, and I believe she was put in boarding school. And I didn't have Priscilla's number. It would have been awkward for me, and so I have memories of her from when she was a small girl. But she seems to be happy. I think it's great she's doing music. Elvis would be so thrilled about that, and I'm happy for her.
Well, I want to thank you, first of all, for taking the time to be on our program today. It truly has been a pleasure in both ways. The first way is that when, Elvis had passed in 1977, it locked forever a memory of how he was and how I remembered him, which is just an energetic lot of fun. And even as the myths and the things that were being said about him, to me, they just became ghosts. I didn't even concern myself with that. And then here, for the first time, I read a story, and I said, this is how I would have thought he would have been. You can see that being in entertainment, when you're out there and you're putting yourself out there with people that, when you're done with it, you just kind of want to get away and you want to have that sense of, sort of a quiet isolation, for lack of a better, just to unwind, and to feel comfortable. And to think that here was this guy, that people were saying, no, he was just becoming isolated and lonely and miserable and hooked on all these drugs and drank alcohol. That does not sound like an Elvis Presley, a guy that really, he became who he did because he really enjoyed life.
Well, he did, and a lot of people said, he was pushed, he should not have been touring, and I thought, I never once saw that. No one around Elvis ever said, he's ill. No one ever told me that. He's too ill, he shouldn't be performing. And, he had doctors, you look up to doctors. I thought, my God, they're taking care of Elvis Presley. He must have the best doctors in the world, and you trust all these people. And a few weeks before his last tour, I remember he said to me, I've been off too long. And I thought, this isn't a man being pushed. This was in his blood. And what he loved to do. And, were Elvis alive today, no doubt about it, he would still be singing gospel. I'm sure he would be producing behind the scenes. He wanted to do more films. Like I said, we all missed out, unfortunately, on so much more from a very talented and great human.
I know, speaking of his films, that even as a young boy, I'd think to myself, boy, it'd be cool to be Elvis Presley. He's good-looking, he's got his buddies, he could sing and just sweep anybody off their feet. Boy, I'd like to have that.
Well, he was such an original, too,
Right.
Just the dance moves, no choreography, and it just came so natural to him. It was great. I remember when I was young thinking my brother kind of looked like him if he had his hair brushed up a certain way. Right.
Now, I'm kind of curious. I'm sure people have asked you this. Did he really learn his dance moves from Forrest Gump?
Oh, yeah. Did he learn his dance moves from Forrest Gump? That was a great scene in the film. I don't think so.
I don't think so either. So now, I don't know if you have a website, but I know that you do have a Facebook page. People can find out more and, how to go about getting the book, which I really recommend to people because, this was the first time I'd ever read anything about Elvis Presley as far as a biography goes, and I was so glad that I did. And then to have the chance to talk with you about that because I think it's something people really should take a look at and read as well because it's a great story and there is some splash and some fun in there as well. But I love that it just had such a regular, everyday, day in and day out feel. And I thought that was just such a great touch to put, sort of a human twist on someone who seemed to be almost above being human, so to speak.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I appreciate that. I certainly, wanted the fans to know what was, going on behind the scenes and try to place them there, what was happening, inside his home. And like I said, I hope they walk away understanding that he was in good spirits 98% of the time and looking forward to many, many things.
And your Facebook page?
It's just Ginger Alden, and then, but I do have a like page, which is probably the route to go right now.
Okay, great. Well, Ginger, I want to thank you again for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today and sharing this great story with the world. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
Okay.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there. You can find out more. Visit us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. And also be sure to sign up for our exclusive news updates. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.